With a name like Headless, you know subtlety isn't going to be an issue for this movie. So yes, we are talking about the 2015 movie called Headless, directed by Arthur Colfer, and actually has quite a lot of people involved in this film that would then go on to be involved in the movie Harvest Lake, which I also recently reviewed on this channel. For example, Ellie Church stars in both this and Harvest Lake. Now the story here is actually set in the 1970s, and this movie actually bills itself as the lost slasher film of 1978, so it has a throwback kind of retro style. It has this kind of grainy kind of film stock sort of quality to it, and we really have the film following our antagonist, essentially this serial killer who is very disturbed thanks to his abuse by his mother and his sister while he was young, and he kind of imagines this kind of like small child with a skull head who is essentially kind of telling him to do things, and ultimately goes around, beheads his victims and then rapes their severed head. Yes, I did say this movie wasn't particularly subtle. And then on the flip side of that, we have I guess our main protagonist, who is this kind of young girl struggling to kind of meet ends meet. She's got this layabout boyfriend played by Mr. Parker, who is actually a YouTuber, and you know, she's got her friend played by Ellie Church, and it's kind of these two parties obviously going to run into each other. Now, plot and character arcs and stuff like that isn't something this movie is particularly interested in. It is really just killing scenes after killing scenes, and ultimately this killer is basically just cutting a swathe through anyone who he fancies. This movie is certainly not going to be for the faint of heart. There's not a line that this movie doesn't want to cross. You know, like I've said, this guy cuts off his head, eats eyeballs with the dribbles kind of going into the still conscious eye sockets of the victims, then cuts off their head and then literally rapes their gaping neck wounds. So yeah, this movie is going to be for a particular taste. Obviously, it being kind of meant to be a sort of 70s film, there's no CGI, it's all kind of practical effects here. Some of the stuff, yeah, it looks kind of good, but I've got to say, doesn't necessarily obey the laws of physics. There's a scene, for example, where a guy, he's sitting on like a woman, and he literally just cuts her legs off with a machete, and thinking, there's no way that's cutting through bone, especially with that angle. It's just a bit silly. So yeah, you know, suspension of disbelief on things like, you know, believability and that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, this movie isn't afraid to show you some gruesome kills, and like I said, it goes pretty disgusting. The guy literally plucking out eyeballs and the gooey insides are just dribbling down his chin. So yeah, it's pretty graphic, so not for the faint of heart. And the gore, you know, it's effective, not terribly realistic, but it's like, I don't think it's meant to be. So obviously it's kind of a throwback movie. And this guy is kind of wearing this kind of this skull mask, which I kind of think is, it looks quite effective. So this is obviously made for a certain audience. It's very much made to please the kind of the hardcore kind of slasher films, the fan of kind of grindhouse cinema, the kind of the films of yesteryear. These kind of very kind of like, you know, X-rated and the video Nazi type movies. But for casual horror fans, this movie will offer nothing really beyond that. It kind of doesn't have any real sort of depth to it. There's no kind of character arc. There's very little characterization. Only our main sort of female protagonist gets a little bit, and even then it's only very slight. And other than that, most of the characters seem fairly kind of like two-dimensional and not much kind of meat on the bones. And our antagonist, this killer, you know, we do get a fair bit of backstory, which I actually think gives the most meat on the bones in regards to story here. But as an adult, he's kind of doesn't really say anything, but he can read, which I found odd. He hasn't learned to speak, but he can read. But anyway, you know, yeah, it's just lots of excuses to get lots of killing in, basically. So for its audience, I feel that this movie is definitely something that if you are a gore hound, if you like kind of like your hardcore horror slashers, things like that, that you just want to check out. For casual horror fans, people interested in things like The Exorcist, The Shining, The Conjuring, movies like that, then no, you probably won't be interested in it. And I feel like, yeah, it's a one-note movie essentially. But with that note, I feel it is pretty successful with doing that. So I'll give this movie a 5 out of 10. I feel it serves its audience well, but doesn't kind of go beyond that. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.